Hello, this is Erica Norton, and I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video. I'm very excited to have with us today Attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee. She owns her own law firm that specializes in family and real estate in the Worcester area. And if you're in the area and you're fortunate to speak with Nicole and have her as your lawyer, then you are very lucky because she's very intelligent, and we're very lucky that every week she comes to us with important advice in both of those areas of the law. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. So, today we're going to talk about something that is sad, but also interesting. I find narcissistic people to be very interesting in the way they think sometimes, but today it's going to be pertaining to alcohol and drugs in divorce court. No, family court.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that definitely, people want to talk about it all the time when it's happening, and the other party always says, it's you don't know what you're talking about. You're making a big deal of nothing. And that's where it really gets tough because the judges have to make hard decisions.
Right. And it gets emotional too because, some people had the control over their children all the time, and it didn't really matter as much if somebody else had an addiction. And now that they have to split time with someone, with the children, a lot of times it may leave that person that's not an addict, scared to death about what's going to happen to their children.
Absolutely. And again, it's always the other party's fault, which is always very interesting. I'm not the one that's consuming that. I'm not the one that's doing it, but somehow it's my fault. But I think the more important thing is, again, what the court is here to do is make sure that that child is protected, regardless of the age of the child. I don't care if your child is an infant or your child is 17 years old. Exposure to that situation is not healthy for any child.
It's so true. And I mean, I would say that definition of an addict is really, not someone that just recreationally has a drink once in a while, for example, or and I know there are certain drugs that are legal now, but still shouldn't be done in front of children. There are people that don't know when to stop. And unfortunately, when things get out of control, they're not able to take care of their child if something bad were to happen, or maybe something bad is going to happen because of them letting things get out of control with their addiction.
Absolutely. And I mean, you have the scary parts where somebody does get behind the wheel of a car and they crash. Hopefully they're crashing into, something that doesn't have people involved, but they have that issue where you could kill somebody else. And, a lot of times you have the children in the back seat. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that and I've witnessed that, and now DCF is involved, rightfully so. But you know, their issue is, oh well, DCF's in my life. This is ridiculous. They don't need to be here, and you shouldn't have been drinking or doing drugs. And again, that's the reason why the court's there to make those protections.
Well, I'm wondering if there are clear limits that are set when you're in court. I don't remember there being any things said when I was going through a divorce. Nobody in my divorce was considered an addict. I do know a friend who was not an addict, but it happened to be part of their agreement, and they didn't even have attorneys or anything. But the agreement was nobody has a drink when they have the child.
Absolutely. And I think it's on a case by case basis and what you're comfortable with. Generally speaking, we're not going to put that issue in an agreement unless there is a reason. If you have a questionable thing, we're going to put that in. If you're an addict, we're absolutely putting that in. And it doesn't matter whether you're in recovery or not. Where you are really doesn't matter. It's a matter of, again, making sure that child is protected. So, really, that's the goal of, well, is it ever going to be never? Or is it going to be only during the time that I have my parenting time? And generally speaking, if we're going to do something like that, we're going to put limitations. Obviously, we're going to say no illegal substances, but in terms of legal substances, then we're going to usually minimize it to 4 hours prior to and during your parenting time. So, the question is, again, if you're drinking and even if it's excessive after 4 hours, you hopefully are at a point where if you were driving, you're driving sober. Obviously the same thing for marijuana use or something like that.
Now, do they have like a clear cut, this is absolutely not allowed for anyone, even if there is no issue? Because, people go through breakups and, a lot of times they weren't doing something. Now all of a sudden, their behaviors are different. They might be going out on dates and they might be the socializing, social drinking and drug use or whatever people are doing. Um, they might be sad and they might be self-medicated.
Absolutely. And I think, the answer is going to be no. We're not going to micromanage how you're raising your children. But the moment you bring a problem to us, we're going to address that problem. So we're going to figure out if it's really a problem. We're going to figure out who knows that problem and to what extent that problem exists. And then obviously put precautions in place once we have that. So, again, parties can agree to whatever they want, but generally speaking, the court isn't there to micromanage your lifestyle.
Oh, I mean, I guess that's good to know. I mean, I guess it's like any other court of law, right? You're innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. And that's the reason why we do have, drug screens and hair follicle screens, simply for that reason, so that we can make sure in the event that we need to do testing, we can do it and we can know what the results are.
Exactly. Now, a lot of people maybe don't do like marijuana and alcohol, and maybe other harder drugs and harder alcohols, but they might be prescribed something, especially if they're going through something to calm them down. And there's nothing that prevents somebody from abusing that. And that may be tough to prove unless there's a situation. And what is your experience with prescription drugs?
Well, again, even if you're having prescription drugs, that's one of the things that they're going to automatically ask you when you're going in for testing. They're going to ask you for all of your medications. They're going to ask you for your dosages. They're going to ask for the prescriptions. So the good news is some of that is covered. Now, whether or not you're abusing or not, they can't necessarily say, unless they're obviously doing it on a regular basis and maybe your prescription or something ran out. So there are times that they can do things, but again, it's going to go back to what does your behavior look like? How is somebody describing that? And again, if I'm representing a party, I'm going to go, well, if you see that he's driving erratically, you're going to pick up the phone immediately and call the police. Let the police pull him over. They're going to do a test and they're going to say, yeah, you're under the influence, because guess what? You can be under the influence of prescription drugs and you can't drive when you're in those conditions. So there are ways that we can get that information heard. Obviously, if we have, people at workplaces or schools, they're going to be able to tell us when mom or dad is not acting right. They're going to tell us when they're out of turn. So there are other sources that we can certainly get it from, but picture's worth 1,000 words, as is a video. So sometimes it's just a matter of somebody pulling out their cell phone and going, I'm recording you. And make sure you're saying that. But that's what you need to do, because obviously this is a situation. And, if you do know something's happening, I've had that issue too, is great. Have a wellness check. You'll have, so, you're like, what? And you're trying to, you understand what your ex is doing and they're with the kids, call for a wellness check. So there are things that we can do even though we're not in that situation and the children aren't physically present. You have the drunk dials, you have the text messages that are very irate, and all of a sudden you go, every time he's drinking, he starts doing this. You're going to start putting these factors together, and then we have the resources. And again, it depends on what availability we have to make that happen, but we can certainly get it to the proper authorities so that we can present it to the judge.
So just for those out there that don't know what a wellness check is, like what is a wellness check? What happens during a wellness check?
Wellness check is you're concerned about somebody's safety. So I'm calling the police department and I'm saying, hey, I'm really concerned. My ex-husband has the children and he was slurring his words or he stormed out of the house and he was driving on the street really erratically when he left. He's at this address. The police will go to the address, knock on the door, and have a conversation. And obviously, if they have any concerns, and they may ask to see the children, depending on what the age and depending on what your story is, but they're going to make that determination once they start talking to the other parent, and they're going to have that conversation possibly with the kids. I've had other people call and go, I just got a call from my daughter saying that dad's has a knife and he's wielding it. Okay, great. That's it warrants a wellness check. We're certainly going to make sure that we're going to have a separate conversation with the children and ask the children if they're safe. And we're not going to do it in the presence of that parent. So again, it's used for resources not to harass your ex, not to go and say that they're doing something wrong unless you have a valid reason. You don't want to cry wolf because that's going to backfire as well.
I mean, that's a great advice. So starting with a wellness check, I mean, that might be one of the things that you do, but like what would be the process of trying to get help for your children who you know is spending time with a parent who is abusing drugs or alcohol to the point where they can't take care of the children? And I guess how would it look? They hire you first? Do they put something in with the court?
I think it all depends on timing. When is it happening? How frequently? What's the degrees? Sometimes again, if the police do a wellness check and they find that there's something wrong, they're mandated reporters. They're going to call the police. That's going to give you an ability to run into court and ask for emergency orders. Maybe I'm already involved in your life and I can just run in with you. Maybe you don't have an attorney and now you have to find an attorney. So it kind of depends on where you are in the scheme of things, but certainly have that conversation with the attorney. And I'm going to say, if I didn't say it every other time, is document. You're going to document everything you have. You're going to get the information from the police department. You're going to take your photos. You're going to have your audios. You're going to have your emails, your text messages, whatever that is. Document it. Bring it all to the court or bring it to your attorney so that we can draft up the appropriate documents to go in. And sometimes it's going to be an emergency temporary orders. Sometimes it might just be not really sure, but we need to watch for this, and we'll go in on a temporary order in 10 to 15 days. So really, again, have that conversation because sometimes you want to overreact, and I get it. It's your children. They're the love of your lives, and you don't want any harm to come to them. But I have a feeling doesn't rise to the level of emergency. We need more. So that's what I'm going to say. Let's back up a little bit. Let's gather some intel. Maybe your children are going to school and you can encourage your children at school to tell the guidance counselor or teacher of this. That's going to be a mandated reporter. So again, there's ways that we can get this information to the proper authorities so that we have that ammunition to go into court.
And what are some of the consequences if somebody is found to have been under the influence while with their children to the point where they can't actually take care of them? Are they taken away? Are they put in a program? And are they given, visits where somebody has to be there?
Well, we cannot force anyone to do any programs. So unless there's criminal charges, and that would be a criminal court issue, and they might have to do a program there. But in probate and family court, nobody's going to force you into a program. Nobody's going to force you into counseling. The end result is, yeah, you'll still get to see your children depending on the severity of it, but you'll most likely get to see your children. It's probably going to be in a supervised capacity with somebody that the other party trusts, which may not be somebody you trust. Or if not, it's going to be a professional supervisor that you're going to have to pay for, or it's going to be a supervised visitation center that you have to pay for. So the ramifications obviously can be severe in certain circumstances when your children are older. Maybe they go, I don't trust mom or dad anymore. I don't want to see them. I can't believe they did this to me. This is a horrible situation. And you might not get any parenting time. So it can be that extreme. And the reality is, it could be forever. I have had issues where a parent can't get their act together, and unfortunately, it's not 3, 6, 9 months to get this cured. It's a lifetime because unfortunately, this person's an addict and they cannot get the help that they want or they need.
So obviously, the best case scenario is that there are no issues like this. But if there are, that somebody can get help and they can turn their life around, and spend time with their children and have those relationships that are so important to have. Um, but that sadly, there are a lot of cases with addiction where it's like if you can't force them into the program, and unless it's a legal situation, then programs don't even always help some individuals. So it's sometimes it's just it just happens over and over again, and sometimes it's best that the child isn't with somebody like that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and it's sad, and believe me, that kid is hurting probably just as much as the parents are. And I mean both parents. Mom or dad didn't want the other parent to be like this, and the person with an addiction says, "You're to blame and everything's wrong and you're the culprit of all this." But at the end of the day, everybody in this family is suffering, including the children. And now the children are in therapy because they're not seeing mom or dad because mom or dad has an issue and won't get help.
I mean, that's very good advice. Um, I guess just to touch on something, we could do an entire interview on this, is the whole situation with Rob Reiner and his wife being killed by their son, who they knew had a mental illness for years, made a movie with the son about the mental illness. It's a very scary situation, and you know, it ended up very badly for the parents because and they knew they were scared, and they didn't put him in an institution they probably should have.
Absolutely. And I think, big thing is, again, it goes back to, it's been a long time coming. It's been a history. Like, about it. And again, obviously it's a mental health issue versus a disease with the drugs and alcohol. But you have the same components there. And again, the family's still suffering. So unfortunately, if they don't get the help that they need, then that ultimately could be the result. And if it wasn't the son doing it, unfortunately, sometimes it is a parent that is unfortunately killing their children and or their ex-spouse. Because again, that's what happens with mental illnesses, with diseases that go untreated.
And unfortunately, the signs are there, and you love that person, so you choose to ignore a lot of those signs, and then something bad happens. And luckily, I mean, the court has a lot of experience with this sort of thing, and they do take it seriously if the signs are there and it's brought up to the court. They do put things in place.
They do, and they put a lot of safeguards. And I think, most recovering addicts have that issue. Why? Oh my God, would you just let me see my kids? There's a process, and unfortunately, I get that you're frustrated about the process, but trust that they really do have your best interest at heart. They have your children's best interest at heart. They're not perfect, but they really are looking out for those children a lot more than most people. And they're looking at it with a little bit of different eyes and a little bit of perspective, and they see this day in and day out. So they are making those hard calls. And yeah, from my perspective, if you really want to see your children, guess what? You suck it up, you do your time. And when you do your time, the court will respect that as long as you're doing everything right and will give you what you're looking for. But you've got to jump through those hoops. You've got to put all the time in because that's where it's going to matter.
Well, this has been some great information, and on a very serious and important topic. because it could mean people's lives. People get hurt, people get killed if they are not taking care of themselves, and if you're not reporting someone who is not doing the right thing with their children. Um, you don't want that. You want everyone to be safe. You want yourself to be safe. You want your ex to be safe, but if for sure the children have nothing to do with it, they shouldn't be put in danger like that. And so thank you so much for all of your insights today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you everyone out there for watching. We will look forward to seeing you again next week with another important topic. Have a great weekend.